Have you ever asked yourself which camera mode is the best fit for my photography? If not, hopefully this video will help you discover which one is best for you. Tons of professional photographers use a wide variety of camera modes when shooting, the most popular of which may very well be manual mode with auto ISO. However, in this video, I'm going to tell you why I don't like to use this popular camera mode and what I do instead. If you're new to the hobby of wildlife photography specifically, I'd most often find myself recommending that you start with aperture priority with auto ISO. In aperture priority mode, you set your f-stop number and the camera will take care of the setting in the shutter speed and the ISO. Aperture priority is probably the easiest to use due to the fact that you'll almost never find yourself needing a higher f-stop number in wildlife photography, due to the need for high shutter speeds to freeze action as a beginner, and before you get into any types of experimental wildlife photography, you'll always find yourself needing more light coming in through the lens and not less. For this, having the lowest possible f-stop number is great, and it also gives you the second benefit of having a more shallow depth of field. A shallow depth of field is almost always more coveted than a wider depth of field in wildlife photography, meaning that in most all situations, there is no downside for shooting at the lowest possible aperture in your camera. Because of these things, I most often recommend to beginners to set their camera into aperture priority mode and crank their f-stop number as low as possible for their lens, while the camera takes care of the rest in auto ISO. As you grow in your capability as a wildlife photographer, you may find yourself wanting more control over your settings and starting to control your shutter speed alongside your aperture. For this, many wildlife photographers will recommend using manual mode with auto ISO. In this situation, you are in control of your aperture and your shutter speed, while the camera is in control of the ISO. Lots of photographers recommend this and shoot with this due to the fact that it will automatically and almost instantaneously adjust to lighting scenarios with no sacrifice in how you would like to use your shutter speed and aperture and how you make it look. This means you can freeze the action or blur the action at the correct amounts due to your control of shutter speed, and you can keep that f-stop number as low as possible for the reasons mentioned previously, due to your control of aperture. Since the camera is in control of ISO, it will automatically adjust your ISO according to the lighting, which has no effect on the artistic aspect of your image, and will only affect the amount of grain, sharpness, or noise included in your image. When exposing your image automatically, your camera will attempt to expose for a medium gray tone, which tries to keep the darks from getting too dark and underexposed, and the brights from getting too bright and overexposed. This is the reason I don't like to shoot in manual mode with auto ISO. Because the camera is trying to expose for a medium gray in each shot according to your metering mode, each image has the chance to be exposed differently from the last image in its sequence, which is the same for any other automatic mode you would use on a camera as well. This can lead to an inconsistency in lighting between one shot to the next in a sequence and makes post-processing more time-consuming and difficult. Typically, when editing in a sequence and scene in Lightroom afterwards, I'll create my edit for a certain angle and lighting scenario and then copy and paste it over to all of the same images in that sequence. However, if each shot was exposed differently due to the camera's automatic interpretation of lighting and how it should expose, this means I'll have to retweak each shot in the sequence if I hope to edit them to the most ideal version I see fit. In post-processing, this can consume minutes or hours of your time that personally, I'd rather save. My solution to this is shooting in full manual mode. Rather than letting the camera control any aspect of my exposure, I control all the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO adjustments, meaning that each shot will be the exact same exposure until I change my settings. This leads to a nice and easy editing sequence with the same lighting between shots that I choose and speeds up my post-processing workflow. Now, the argument against this can be that exposing completely in manual mode is time-consuming, and there is some truth to this. Yes, if you're wanting your camera to expose for a medium gray all the time in your images, then manual mode with auto ISO can save you valuable fractions of a second in wildlife photography. However, I would argue that many times you may not want to shoot for a medium gray in your shots, in which you'll have to use exposure compensation anyways to adjust your camera's exposure. This is just as time consuming out in the field as switching between ISO values, and therefore doesn't save you any time in scenarios like this. In all reality, I rarely find myself wanting to shoot at a perfect medium gray exposure, meaning that in most scenarios, I save very little time or no time out in the field when shooting in manual mode with auto ISO, as opposed to full manual mode. And I only hurt myself in the post-processing, spending extra time making minor adjustments and tweaks due to variances in lighting. Full manual mode gives you complete control over your settings in the way you want when you're shooting out in the field and doesn't waste your time in post-processing. I hope this video was insightful for you in deciding what type of camera mode you can shoot in and just in sharing my experience personally. If you want to learn more about what might be stopping your images from being sharp, check out this video in the end screen here, and I'll see you guys next time.